Hello everyone, welcome back to the session. We're going to start the next session. We have Muskan, Deepika and Sudipto here. So Muskan and Deepika have prepared really nice questions which Sudipto will be answering us. Over to you, dear team.
Hello.
Thank you, Didi. Thank you, Tanya and Prakash Didi, for this wonderful opening. Hi, everyone. I am Muskan. I am a spoken word poet and a member of the Revolutionary Council at KR. Media is the fourth pillar of democracy, and it has the power to create awareness and thus bring change. Our education system does need change and rebuilding. To help us identify the role of media in rebuilding the education system, we have with us today Sudipto Mondal, the executive editor of the News Minute, an Indian digital news platform based in Bangalore, Karnataka, an investigative journalist with a special interest in caste and communal relations. Sudipto has been an advocate of education for all. He has previously worked with The Hindu, Hindustan Times, Al Jazeera, and The Federal. We're excited to have you here. Over to you, Deepika.
Hello everyone, this is Deepika. I'm a learner of 12th standard and I'm dialing in from Uttarakhand. So without wasting more time, let's just start with the session. So Bhaiya, the first question for you is, the current education system is full of a lot of challenges and hopes as well. So what according to you is the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity to address or leverage in rebuilding the education system?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for also the introduction. I'm very happy to be here, and but I might not have happy news in response to some of the questions that you have asked over here. Starting with the first one, which is what are the challenges? What is the biggest challenge? I don't know, but I would definitely like to point out that the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges, would be the gap in technology, right? This time which has passed in the last couple of years, that has really come to the fore. How children from marginalized communities, which is scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, students from minority communities such as Muslims and Christians particularly, and of course people who come from economically weaker sections and girls have suffered a lot, because of this gap in access to technology. Because as you know, many of you were attending classes online, and now a whole lot of educational material is available online. And while we might have gone back to offline classes, like I said, there's a lot of material out there, and a new knowledge system has been created online, particularly in these last couple of years, which has become inaccessible to a lot of children who come from socially excluded communities. So that for me is one very big worry. With more and more knowledge getting generated online, the fact that a lot of people cannot access that online world is a big worry for holistic education, because it is no longer about just textbooks in today's world. So that's one thing. The other thing, of course, is the absence, or the this has been a problem not just over the last couple of years, but this has now become, one can say, a perennial problem with Indian education, which is that there is a lot of focus on science and technology and mathematics and those subjects which can make you a doctor or an engineer. And what is happening is that the social education, which is very much a part of raising a human being to be a part of a civilized society, now that is also an important role that education can play in one's life, right? And I see that with more and more focus on these technical aspects of education, the social education that is very important is is completely absent, I would say, in a lot of cases. Like, where would you get your social education from? You would get it from what you would pick up in your languages classes, for example, because language is not just about the grammar, it is about the literature. It's about so much more than just passing an exam, right? You sit in an English class because it's a class where there are stories being discussed, people's histories are being discussed. Subjects like history itself, for example, right? It has been reduced to like a mathematics kind of subject. Which date did which person invade which country over? So you can now score 100% marks also in history. Why? Because of how history is a story in the end of the day, and it has to be told as a story. And why should we learn history? Because we should learn from history so that we don't make the same mistakes. And today, with the kind of social divide we see, a lot of you, I hope, are people who believe in the Indian Constitution, who believe in the values that brought this country together. And if you are people who believe in those values, you will definitely also probably be aware of how on the streets today in India, there is a lot of violence. There is a big challenge to the constitutional morality, which we call it constitutional morality. There is all different kinds of morality, but we as a nation, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, SCs, Brahmins, everybody came together and accepted a common morality, which is the constitutional morality. To understand that constitutional morality, like how, for example, if you want to learn about Christian morality, you read the Bible. If you want to learn about Hindu morality, you read the scriptures. If you want to learn about Muslim morality or Islamic morality, you read the Quran and the other works. Similarly, to understand the Indian morality, you read the Constitution. And to understand the Constitution, you have to also read literature, also read history. You need to be able to understand what is being said in those civics lessons that are being taught to you, right? And that, I feel, is being given less and less importance going forward. And these are, to my mind, the two big challenges: the technology gap and the absence of social education in our present system. Yeah, that's my answer. Are you still there? Was it too
Thank you,
long?
Jaya, for answering the question so beautifully.
I can't hear you.
Deepika, you're on mute. Can you please unmute yourself?
Oh, sorry. I was saying thanks, Jaya, for answering the question so beautifully.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering that question. Even I resonate a lot with the points that you mentioned. I'm also a humanities student, so I've seen that stigma around social learning and social education when I talk about the subjects that I study. And you also talked about learning gap during the pandemic. So my next question is related to that. There were discussions around the learning gap during the pandemic highlighted by some sections of media. My question is, how can the media ensure that these discussions keep on rising?
Well, I suppose the answer, is in the question itself. We know that, we need to keep writing about these things. We need to keep, more than writing, I think, one of the things that has happened in the pandemic is that the media has taken a very big hit. Okay. Ads have dried up. Hundreds of journalists, I would say, some say even thousands, have lost their jobs. Now, with this staff that we have, all news organizations that I know are working at less than optimum staff, right? And as a result, what is happening is that field work is suffering, right? So I'll give you a small example. So let's say there is a story about a child who's probably being let's say harassed by a school or an institution, and at the same time there is also some kind of militant organization which is taking out an attack on a bunch of vulnerable people, right? As you know, this is happening every second day. um, children and students from minority communities, for example, are being attacked. So right now it has become a very difficult situation for us. There are stories about livelihoods, because I would put education in the category of something that directly affects somebody's livelihood. And then there are stories about life, right? And there is only one reporter, right? And we are facing a very difficult time, and the choice has become, literally, like I said, between doing a story about somebody possibly losing their life or somebody losing their livelihood. Okay. And the I don't know if it directly answers your question, which is how can we highlight the gap. But while answering that, I think I've brought attention to the fact that the people who should do the addressing of this problem aren't around anymore. Many of them have lost jobs. So, but then yes, the straight answer to it would be just to keep writing about these things. And perhaps now that we have such um, articulate young people such as you guys, who knows, maybe you guys can write some pieces for us. um, um, we can our editors can work with young students who are probably in their 11th standard, 12th standard, doing humanities. That's a good bunch of young people for us also to work with, because we are always, as journalists, trying to find out what's happening on the ground. But if we had, say, an intern or an apprentice, or we have this term in journalism called cub reporter. I don't know how many of you have heard of this term. So who knows, if we had a couple of cub reporters who say, hey, in my neighborhood, I can do some reports and I can tell you what's happening. With Learning Gap, I can go across to the poorer parts of my own neighborhood and look at what those children are doing. Perhaps I can go to the government school and do a report. And I think that should be interesting. I don't know if any of you will be interested.
No, that sounds like an amazing idea. And I think apart from, bringing in a lot of information and making it more accessible, I think it'll also make student voice more accessible in these platforms. So I think that sounds like a great idea.
Thanks, Baya, for answering that question. You also mentioned the problem that our media institutions, our media houses are facing. And also, we all have witnessed a very decline of the institution of media. So my next question is related with that. One of the purpose of the media is to raise issues of public interest, with education being one of them. But we have witnessed the amount of negligence and ignorance mainstream media particularly has shown towards this. Even in the lockdown period, the education sector faced a lot of serious problems like unavailability of gadgets and a lot of students dropping out of school, girl students getting married, and the economic crisis snatched the opportunity of getting education from a lot of students. So, but according to you, media could have done differently in order to raise the concerns of these children.
See, okay, here I think, in a way, I think the previous question and this one are kind of related. So one thing I want whoever's listening, to kind of consider is that, see, the media does not bring change. The media, journalists, we report on change. If there is change in things, we try as much as we can to capture the change. Change is brought by other players in democracy. We report on those players more often than not. I know that many times, people like to say that journalism it brings change, creates awareness. Yes, but my experience has also shown that it is a big no also. At the most, we can tell you what happened yesterday, day before, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. If somebody comes and tells you that there were aeroplanes in ancient India, we can tell you that no, that's not true. right? If somebody tells you that people are very, very happy with the petrol prices being what they are, we can tell you that that is not the case, right? Or we can do a lot of informing, but the informing, yes, is done with the hope that people will read and take decisions accordingly. Mm, but that is a very big if. People will read and take decisions accordingly, because people don't read. um I don't know, I don't want to take a survey here, but I don't know how many of you read even one newspaper a day. Mm, so I don't know. I mean, what role can media play in bringing awareness, in changing the situation? I don't know. Bringing awareness to, as much as I can definitely say, uh, with my conscience intact, that in the News Minute, for example, we try very hard to cover the education sector. I do also know that there are other publications which do a very good job. The Wire, for example, does a great job. The Hindu does a good job. uh, Indian Express, the North Indian Express, they try and do some work. So there is work that is appearing, very good work that is appearing. If your question is what can media do, the answer is obviously that we should write more. And there is a lot of writing actually, if you look for it, but people don't want to read, or people don't want to watch those shows. And therefore I feel that in the education of young people, uh, educators, educationists, people who are in the policy making space should really think more seriously about including journalistic content, or what we produce, our stories, as part of regular curricular education. Like you have math, science, social, English, blah, blah. You should have a subject called journalism, in which you do two things. One, you learn to write, to edit, to report, but you also learn to read. And read not the way you do rattafying of your other subjects, right? Because you cannot ratify a newspaper, right? You cannot ratify the day's news. I mean, this is something that has to become part of education. And then we will have hopefully a generation that is better informed, a generation that knows the difference between history and fiction, between science and a madman's dreams. Um, but unfortunately, I don't think that is the case. And it is something that people start doing at the stage when they want to prepare for IAS, IPS. Then they'll decide that, oh, now I have to start reading newspapers and I have to follow the current affairs. But current affairs is what? I mean, how can you be part of society and not know what's happening around is also the question. So if you're asking me where are the stories, I can show you where the stories are about these issues. But are you looking hard enough? We've taken one step in your direction. Are you taking one step in our direction? That's my answer. I don't know if that helps.
No, it was really great. So, thank you, Bhaiya, for spotlighting that point too.
Right.
Our next question is, from the past few years, we've seen how the education budget is shrinking steadily. And this has increased the burden on the already limited resources in the education sector. How can the media help us to reach powerful authorities and make them more accountable for their decisions?
We can't. You will have to go and do your dharna in front of the powerful authorities, because that's what students and young people across history and time have done. And when you do that, we will report, we will give you the publicity, we will give you the voice, because it is not our job to start revolutions or hold people by this thing. No, of course, we will report on the government's failures, we will report on the failures of the authorities, of policymakers, of schools, of curriculum. We are consistently keeping that in focus. But yeah, I'm assuming a lot of you in the audience and who are listening may be young people, and also people who are socially active, at least the older ones who are there. I'm sure you are too. So the question is, yeah, the questions have to be also raised from the people. The people don't seem to be asking them.
Absolutely. Thank you for answering.
Our next question is, through your work, you have highlighted the concerns of the marginalized section of the society. Considering that the pandemic has further pushed them towards the poverty and has aggravated their circumstances, what role do you see yourself playing in their rehabilitation?
Right. So this is okay. Here I'd like to speak about an intervention that I have been making, at least since this, of course, started before the pandemic, because in the communities that we are most concerned with, which is, like I said, minorities, Dalits, Adivasis. In these communities, even before the pandemic, there was a kind of a disastrous situation. So there's a certain sense of permanent disaster in those communities. So anyway, I've been working with a few Dalit communities in Bangalore with children between 5 and 15 years of age. And the focus for me has been, how do I get a news lab kind of thing going at the neighborhood level. One thing I realized is that a lot of interventions that we make directly on the ground tend to not be in these slum neighborhoods. They tend to be somewhere outside, where a few children are selected, taken away, trained somewhere else, and then from there on forward. But I thought I'd do something in the neighborhood, so that's when I got in touch with the News Minute and with an NGO called Marga. And what we have been working on is developing this concept of a news lab, in which we try and see, because journalism, for me at least, or for Dhanya Rajendran, who's my editor-in-chief and very good friend and colleague, and for a lot of us at TNM and also our larger network of a few like-minded journalists, we do believe that journalism is not a subject as much as it is a learning tool, right? Like how if you learn English becomes a learning tool for math, for science, for social studies, for history, for vagera vagera, right? So in the same sense, journalism can be used as a tool to learn about different subjects, and including mathematics and science, because journalism is what is it? In the end of the day, it is a moment in the life of the world, which means that everything that happens in the world, and even beyond the world, is something that appears in your news, it appears in newspapers, it is something that we cover as journalists. There is no subject that is alien to us. So therefore, a lot of us who have now, like for example, I have spent 16 years in journalism. I do know that I knew absolutely nothing when I started. And I know about international affairs, I know about how the court functions, I know how the parliament functions, I know how what kind of experiments are happening in scientific research laboratories in IISc and in DRDO. I also know what's happening in social research, because I have to go to the Bangalore University and Hyderabad University and JNU. What I'm saying is that being part of this profession has itself been an educational experience, and that is what led a few of us in journalism to think of how can we now take that as a subject and introduce it at an early age for young students, where they do two things. One, of course, they consume the news, they consume current affairs articles, opinion pieces, discuss them, but also they are encouraged to do stories on their own as well, and learn about the world one story at a time by doing those stories. So this is something that is still at an experimental stage, but I do think uh, we will have some very positive results in the coming years from this experiment. If not anything else, definitely it will help students understand their own subjects better by if we do this well. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sudipto Bhaiya. I had a lot to learn from this conversation, and I'm sure our audience did too. thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences with us. It was great learning to hear from you and look at evolved role of media in rebuilding the education system. And of course, with us as well, the students. Thank you so much.